Last week, the issue of race dominated many of our conversations. In Senekal, the situation eventually ended peacefully on Friday afternoon after two groups of people representing the economic freedom fighters and members of the farming community in the Free State and AfriForum came close to confronting each other during the court appearance of two people accused of murdering a white farming manager, Brendan Horner. So what do the events of the last week tell us about where we are as a country and about where we're going and about where we need to go? First, you'll hear from Professor Tinyiko Maluleke. He's a policy and political analyst based at the University of Pretoria. We start then with Professor Tinyiko Maluleke. Professor Maluleke, good morning.
Good morning, Stephen, and good morning to all your listeners.
Firstly, I would like to suggest that there is a reason that what we saw in Senekal happened in Senekal, why it happened there, and that perhaps the process of integration in our society is happening in different ways, at different speeds, in different parts of the country.
Yes, I think there is a reason that Senekal happened, and there is a reason that Senekal is Senekal. How Senekal was started, roughly 150 years ago, the founding, in inverted commas, of Senekal. Now, Senekal was born in conflict, like many Platteland towns, conflict between the locals and invading Boers who were establishing, at that time, the Boer Republic. So much so that there is a famous war called Ntwaya Senekal, which took place roughly between 1854 and 1858. So during that 10-year period, that decade, it was a decade of war. And here's the interesting thing. The most common accusation between the Boers and the locals at that time, and the locals extended into Maseru, by the way, because Senekal is not that far from Maseru. The most common accusation was stock theft. The one group would accuse the other of stealing stock, and the other would do the same, except that land was also quite central to that battle. So Senekal is not that surprising. Senekal had to happen the way it happened, and we now know that that entire region is a farming area. I mean, the website says it's a progressive, lucrative farming area or something to that effect. I don't know about progressive because there are huge inequalities and divides between those with land and those without, those with farms and those without. Now, all of this, of course, does not justify in any shape or form the brutal murder of the young farm manager on the 1st of October.
In a way, what you're suggesting is it shows you how difficult it is to change society. What I'm trying to get to is that it shows you how difficult it is for a society to change even when you have change at the very top.
Yeah, certainly, especially if the material conditions, if one may use that infamous phrase, if the material conditions have not changed. In other words, if those without are still the same group of people who are without, and those with are still the same group of people who are with 100 years later. So it becomes very difficult to change society in that sense. I mean, you could say, let's forget the past, but how do you forget the past when the past is present? You could also say, let's forget who is black and who is white. Let's build a new society because, after all, blackness and whiteness are social contracts which are actually quite nonsensical. Biologically, they don't exist as such. But when there is a history of privilege based on skin color, and it's still tangible, then it becomes very difficult indeed to change things. Mere change of government nationally is not enough, clearly.
Is there a difference, do you think, in terms of integration between our urban areas and our rural areas? And I'm talking very generally because within urban areas it will be uneven itself.
Look, integration is a difficult concept. There is a sense in which South African society has always been integrated, even if you go back to the 1600s. We have been integrated because it has never been possible for any group to live entirely without some interaction or even some dependence on the other. I mean, what white household over the past 100 years has not had a maid who is black? helping to bring up the children, helping to clean up their house, has not had a gardener who is black working in the garden, and so on. So it's not as if we don't know one another. We have been integrated at the most intimate levels, but that does not affect the power relations. And the power relations and the economic power in particular is what is wreaking havoc in the country. So it's not integration in an ephemeral kind of way. I mean, you could say they are generally integrated. They meet, they are cordial with one another. They greet, and you see them working together. But the power relations have not changed because, on the whole, those who have are a small minority, and those who don't have are a huge majority. And there is a very strong racial element to that reality.
The fact that we are all poorer after the lockdown, and there's plenty of evidence already, even though, the lockdown didn't finish that long ago, that inequality has deepened. More people are without jobs. We seem to have lost over 2 million jobs during the lockdown. I mean, when people are poorer, that adds stress and pressure in any society. Could the situation we have now, where inequality has actually got worse, lead to more pressure, which is then expressed in arguments about race? Because if they're expressed in arguments about race, they're actually expressed in arguments of the economy and economic reality.
But the other reality that is almost at the tip of your tongue, John, is the reality of violence. Because racism is a violent system. Apartheid is a violent system. And violence has become endemic in South African society because there is a relationship between this situation of disparity and the violence. And this violence, unfortunately, is not like the violence I was referring to in the 1850s in the War of Senekal. Now the violence eats everyone up. The rural people are suffering from it. The urban people are suffering from it. When you have a situation of as much violence as we have had in this country, as I argue in that article I published yesterday, of course there's a limit to how much you can say in 800 words. I argue that when a society becomes too used to corpses, people wantonly killed, in crime, in gender-based violence, in police brutality, you can add it all up. When you become used to that, as well as the economic difficulties that you are referring to, then unconsciously you begin to rank the deaths and the killings, just like you rank the lives of people. So you need a very brutal death to say something about it. Or you need a death that is unusual to begin to wake up. And that is a pity when a country sinks to that low. I think that's what we have sunk to. So, yes, the economic difficulties have made things worse, but the economic difficulties have always had a violent element in them. And so Senekal is the manifestation of that in every sense of the word.
Is there another aspect as well, that in politics, if you have two extremes, and I realize that in itself can be a problematic expression, but it can make the extremes stronger if the middle becomes weaker. So in a case like Senekal, it might help one side to be able to oppose the other side. The other side then, their leaders then oppose the first side. And what you have is that the leaders on both sides are able to take their constituencies to more extreme places because the middle can be weak.
Yeah, in Senekal, it's not just two sides, it's several sides. And that's the point I tried to make in that very same article which I published yesterday, where I talk about many Senekals and not just one Senekal. So it's not merely that you have one side with one leader, the homogeneous, as it were. In my mind, I have this imaginary situation, Stephen, that there may have been in that crowd of EFF supporters a young man or a young woman or an older woman or an older man donning their EFF uniform, joining in the songs and singing their heart out, finding occasion to express their pent-up anger for a long time after suffering for so long in that area. But, you know, by 8 o'clock and that day at night, or let's say 8 o'clock the following morning, the EFF is gone, the town is quiet, and that young man or young woman must go back to the farm where they work. And they will be told, where is your Malema now? Where is Malema now? That is the reality that we have. So we have two sides, and maybe that spectacle showed us very vividly the EFF this side and the Boers on the other side. But in reality, these people live together, work together, and depend on one another, and unevenly, unequally in terms of power. And that is the problem that needs to be resolved, because that young man or that woman is in trouble. If they don't lose their job, they certainly will suffer for Malema.
Professor Tinyiko Maluleke, thanks very much indeed. Fascinating conversation.